Dusty, have you ever gone on a hunting trip?
Well, yeah.
You pack all your stuff. Let's say you're driving to New Hampshire. Let's say I'm driving to Ohio, and you're hunting for 4, 5, 6 days. What's the biggest challenge you usually have?
You're going to stop multiple times and get gas, and I worry about odor the whole way.
It's always in the back of your head. After talking to our friend Tim Gothier, we realized that there's a better solution that is portable. And that solution is called the ScentLock Enforcer. This nifty little device, about the size of an iPhone, it produces ozone. Ozone is this naturally occurring O3 molecule that actually naturally removes odors, kills bacteria, binds to all kinds of odor particles in the air, and basically makes you scent-free instead of like a scent cover-up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
You can put this in your tote. It operates off of a USB and has an 8-hour battery life.
It's the personal ozone generator.
It is the personal ozone generator. If you want to check it out, go to scentlockenforcer.com. That's SCENTLOK Enforcer.com. Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, powered by ScentLock Enforcer, episode number 167, part 2. Jared Scheffler, a monster public land Kansas whitetail. The finale, the kill. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by the ScentLock Enforcer, the Euro Hanger, and Morse's Sporting Goods. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hey guys, this is Dan Bates with Coon Archery, the timeman and inventor of the Hang-On Helper. You're listening to my favorite show. It's about to be yours, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hi, I'm Jim Shockey, and you're about to listen to my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
I'm Chrissy Titus. I'm co-host of RMES Female Television Show and NRA I Am Forever. Gear up for another amazing episode with Jay and Dusty on the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. You know, I am so psyched that you pushed that play button right there on your iPhone, your iDevice. I'm not sure what you pressed exactly, but I know you're going to be hanging out with me for the next hour to talk deer hunting. There's nothing that gives me more pleasure than that, just to sit here and talk deer hunting with my friends, you and the rest of the diehard deer hunting fanatics that are a part of Big Buck Nation. And you know who's an integral part of Big Buck Nation is my co-host, Dusty Phillips from Ohio. And he's sitting right here with us. What's going on, Dusty?
Beautiful, beautiful time of year, Jay. The archery season has launched off here in Ohio. And, this time of year, it only comes once a year. So super excited about that. And best of luck to everybody that's out there hunting the whitetails. And, man, absolutely. I hope that everybody has great success this season.
Be safe out there, but hunt hard. And, it was 32 degrees here in New Hampshire just the other day, and it really got me excited, dude. It was crazy. Just that crisp, hard drives you crazy to get back out in the woods because you know the deer are starting to move in those cold temperatures. And it's just that nice, dry, cool weather. Just love that.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely gets your mindset on whitetail hunting. That's a fact.
I have a favor to ask of everybody, actually. We're trying to conduct a survey of who listens to this show. And there's really no way to do that except to have you fill out a survey form. And we can kind of get some demographics, but I'm trying to break it down a little further. And I was wondering if you could do me a favor and Dusty a favor and go to bigbuckregistry.com/survey and fill out that survey. It's just I think it's just a few basic questions, but we're trying to get an understanding about who is really listening to the show. And if you would do that, we would deeply appreciate it. There's one other thing I'd like to point out. And that is that I want to say thank you to Mr. Bob Dumont from North Carolina for sending in his pledge to the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. He pledged $10. And if you would like to do that as well, you can go to bigbuckregistry.com/donate. It's where you can become a patron of this show and help to the cause. We have just a few sponsors, but we need more help. So if you would, please go to bigbuckregistry.com/donate. Dusty, we have just the finale of an amazing story on the show today. It's Jared Scheffler coming back for part 2. Part 1 was played last week, and it's the story of his Kansas Whitetail that he shot. And we left it off where he was trailing the buck after he had shot it in the kneecaps, and the buck was still going. And he's basically bouncing around from house to house and property to property trying to figure out where the heck this deer went. Gets one last look at it, and the sun goes down. It
definitely was a cliffhanger, Jay. I heard the story, and I was like, oh, man, when it cut off listening to the show.
Yeah, it's one of those cliffhanger types things. And we've gotten some great responses from people about how much they enjoy listening to the tales of the deer stories. Just, we interview some people about where they are in the world, or like if they're in the hunting industry. But right now we're getting a lot of really positive feedback about people listening to the shows that have a longer deer story behind them, like Jared's telling us right now. So we're kind of midway, got another hour or so to go with Jared's story. But stay tuned to the end, because there are all kinds of twists and turns. We haven't even gotten to the twists and turns yet. That's the crazy part. But if you'd like to go back, listen to part 1. We did post it on Facebook, but you can go back and listen again. And this will be the part 2 and the finale of Jared's story behind this big Kansas whitetail they took last year. Before we get to Jared, let's turn to Jim Keller with the deer news.
The deer news this week is sponsored by the Euro Hanger. You don't have to spend big bucks to hang your big buck. Get yourself a Euro Hanger. Facebook.com/Eurohanger, EUROHANGER.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. Our first story this week, Raccoon Hunter, 70, shot while searching for dog. This story was originally featured on the Norwalk Reflector newspaper website and was written by Carrie Ashby. The Huron County, Ohio Sheriff's Office continues to investigate the shooting of a raccoon hunter early Monday outside of New London. Frederick L. Hartman, 75, of New London, is charged with felonious assault. If convicted of the second-degree felony, he faces 2 to 8 years in prison. About 1 a.m. Monday, the Huron County Sheriff's Office received calls about a shooting on Hartman's property. 2 deputies responded initially and determined the victim had been wounded with a gunshot, Sheriff Dane Howard said. The victim was quite a bit off the roadway, and it did appear he was on Hartman's property, the sheriff added. He, the victim, was on a neighbor's property with permission to hunt raccoons. He was hunting raccoons with some friends. He was searching for his dog at the time, said Howard, who noted the victim and Hartman don't know each other. The sheriff said there's no evidence Hartman was intoxicated, but he concealed the pump-action shotgun. Given the weapon, the victim's injuries aren't what would be expected, Howard said. Chief Patrick found the shotgun in the woods not far from where the shooting occurred. Howard stressed if anyone has any trespassing complaints, they should call law enforcement officials so they can investigate and handle the situation. You can't shoot someone just because they're on your property, he said. And we'd like to thank Brad Tansey for sending this story in this week. Drummond Island searchers find World War II vet 98 lost in woods overnight. This story was originally reported on the mlive.com website and was written by John Agar. A 98-year-old World War II veteran was checking on his deer blind on Drummond Island Friday night when he became disoriented and had to spend the night in the woods until volunteer searchers and authorities could reach him the next day. The man, known as Grandpa Fox to Islanders, was in good spirits and even joking around a bit when he was spotted by a searcher's dog on Saturday, September 17th. Drummond Island is off the eastern tip of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan as one of the largest islands on Lake Huron. The search for Floyd Fox, described as a longtime hunting camp visitor to the island, started Friday night when he went to do a little work on his deer blind and didn't return. His family alerted authorities, who searched overnight, according to the account on social media. At 7 a.m. Saturday, there was a call for reinforcements to expand the search. Our community responded with food, coffee, airplanes, and more, according to Collick's account. Fox was found by a volunteer searcher's dog in a lowland area. Asked how he was doing, Fox replied, "Not bad, but I could eat something." Fox's family later went on social media to thank the island residents and authorities for their help in finding Mr. Fox. Nevada game officials schedule emergency mule deer hunts. This story was reported by C. Douglas Nielsen of the Las Vegas Review-Journal. If you are unsuccessful in the big game tag draw but still would like the opportunity to put some venison in your freezer this fall, there is hope. On Saturday, the Nevada State Board of Wildlife Commissioners endorsed plans for 2 emergency mule deer hunts in a designated portion of Area 6. With winter looming, the hunts are for antlerless deer and were put in place as a preemptive measure. Last summer, the Hot Pot and Isenhood fires burned about 128,800 acres in Elko County, and with it, the most important winter range for migrating mule deer in that part of Nevada. Of specific concern is the area known as the Isenhood Basin. Endow biologists estimate that as many as 3,000 to 4,000 mule deer migrate into this area from December to April. They are hoping the emergency hunt will reduce some pressure on the limited food resources. The doe hunts are slated for November 21st through December 4th and December 5th through 18th. 500 tags will be available for each season. Hunters wanting to participate will need to apply at www.huntnevada.com as they would for any other big game tag. Only hunters who have not received a 2016 deer tag are eligible to apply. The application process opened Thursday and closes October 28th. Results should be available November 11th. When deer strike back, animal hit by car tries to get New Jersey driver. This story was originally featured on the USA Today website and was reported by Alex Gecken of the Asbury Park, New Jersey Press. The deer Ellen Sager hit was certainly not frozen in headlights. Sager was driving her 2008 GMC Envoy when she clipped the buck, which then tried to pry his way back into her truck, police said. After the GMC Envoy she was driving clipped a deer on Oak Glen Road on September 17th, the deer struck back and tried to climb into the car. Before I could even get my door open the whole way, it was basically on top of me, Sager recalled. I grabbed a hold of its antlers and put my foot in its chest, just trying to keep him from coming in further. I got him out of the way enough for me to close the door. Howell Police Chief Andrew Kudrick described the incident as a scene from a cheap comedy. Patrolman Austin was nearly as surprised as Sager, he said in a statement, and the two shared a laugh after the incident. Sager suffered a minor knee injury, police said. The deer died from the injuries it sustained in the collision. For links to the story, including the police dashcam video of the deer getting into the car, as well as links to the other stories featured this week, please check out our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry Deer News. If you have any ideas for future topics or have questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller with the Deer News. Without further ado, here's part 2 of Jared Scheffler.
The next day came, and Shay actually came over. He was in another part of Kansas. He had bought a leftover tag, and he had actually got a buck that day, and so he was tagged out. And so him and John, who was filming him, came over to give a hand the next morning. And so we went in and searched this half of this section where we thought he would probably be, and he wasn't in there. And when he wasn't in there, I knew right away then. I was like, this is going to be a tough deal, and it's just going to come down to covering the ground and until we bump him. And so I doubled back, or John was filming me now, and Chancey and Shay were staying in the vehicle on a high point in case the buck came out. They could keep a visual on him from a high location.
Gotcha.
And so John and I we searched the other 320 acres of the section where he had came out of it at last light, and he wasn't in there either. And once we covered that entire section, I mean that section had the most cover in it for quite a few miles. And then it was like, oh man, we got our hands full. We felt like we'd combed it well enough that he wasn't in there, and so then the search continued. I mean, we just kept covering ground, and Chancey ended up. We had seen a good buck standing on that piece of public where I hit mine that morning when we were headed to go look for mine. We had seen a good 8-pointer out there, and he still had a tag. And later on in that day, that buck was still out there. So, and we thought there was a chance that the big one that I had hit might have doubled back and moved all the way back up in there. So Chancey and Shay went after that deer, and Chancey ended up shooting that deer, that 8-pointer that was out there from that morning. And so I kept, in the meantime, John and I kept searching other ground. We searched the 160 acres chunk where the little woodlot was, where he came out in front of that truck, because that was another piece that had a lot of decent cover in it, and he wasn't in there. And we searched, fence lines and little field draws. I mean, stuff that from the vehicle, you're like, there's no way there's a deer out there, but it's like, well, we got to search it, we got to check it. And we just kept covering ground. And by the end of that first day of looking, we had probably covered, well over 1,000 acres, and we had gotten out to just over a mile from where we had last seen the deer.
Gotcha.
And we had covered it pretty well. A lot of that acreage too is fields in there, barren fields, that it's like, well, he's not in this, you know what I mean? So 1,000 acres, it's not 1,000 wooded acres. It's, we felt like we had covered it pretty well.
Right.
So day two comes, and I go back into the original square. Shay and John had to take off then, and so it's down to Chancey and I went back into the square where we had last seen the deer again, just to double check. Like, did I miss something? I mean, was there some little tiny clump of something that I didn't check or whatever? And searched it and searched a bunch of other stuff, and nothing. And now by this point, 2 full days of searching hard for this deer and covering that amount of ground.
Right. How far away are you from the original spot of the first shot?
Now, by the end of day 2, we had covered most everything within about a 2-mile radius.
Okay.
From where we had last seen the deer. We had covered it all the way back to where we had originally hit the deer.
Gotcha.
And so at the end of day 2, Chancey, he was kind of like, man, this sucks, but at some point you gotta cut your losses,
right.
And I know that, and it's like you don't want to give up, you want to keep going, but how long do you keep pressing on before you end up moving on? And he suggested, like, if we see another good buck, we should probably try to go after him, and then middle of the day you can keep looking.
Right.
Well, the morning of day 3 of looking, then, by this point we were starting out the first morning, just glassing different stuff, thinking, well, maybe we'll catch a glimpse of him out next to a fence line or something, just on his feet for a little bit, or something, and then after that I'll go back into search mode. And I went back into the piece for the third time, the section where we had last seen him for a third time, and I combed all of that, like, thinking, well, I don't know. I don't think I missed anything, but your mind starts to, play, like you start to have doubts. You go through it the second time, and you're like, there's no way he's in here. There's absolutely no way he's in here. And then you cover a bunch more ground, and it's like you start to lean back towards, like, well, did I miss something? Is he not in there, or is he in there? And I just,
right.
And well, it was partway through day 3 now, and we're pretty much out of acreage from those 2 landowners. And there was a third landowner. We didn't search his ground, but he didn't have a whole lot, and he had driven his pickup through where he had some cattle, which would have been where that deer would have been held up if he was in there. And it was super open. He definitely would have seen that deer if it was in there, and he hadn't seen him.
Okay.
So we didn't walk his, but he had searched it pretty well. And so we were pretty much out of acreage, and there was a piece of public, another piece of walk-in, that was about 3 to 3.5 miles from where we last seen the deer. And there was a little bit of cover in there, and I thought, maybe he headed this direction. The wind was out of the south that day. Maybe he went into the wind. I mean, I take all that with a grain of salt, but you start to think about it. You start to, you start to think maybe he did that.
Right.
And so I went into that piece.
Another avenue you can pursue. It's another answer.
Yeah, you're just grabbing straws at this point. Like,
right.
Give me something, And so I went into that piece, and as I was going through it, I spotted about 140, 45 class 9-pointer laying in a ditch, and I kind of snuck my way around him, and I finished walking out this piece of public, just so I didn't have any doubts. And I got back to the vehicle and I told Chancey about this deer, and he's like, you got to go after him. He's like, you've searched all this ground. By this point, even before we searched that, we spent, I think, probably an hour or two in the vehicle that day, driving by all these squares, like looking, did we miss this? Is there, trying to determine, like, did we miss anything? We're like out of options, out of ideas.
Right.
And I mean, there was one spot, and it was a little creek bottom, and we had driven by it several times, and I had mentioned it to each other, like, maybe he's in there, but it had, quite a few posted signs around it. We glassed it. There was a ladder stand we could see on the edge of it, from the road when we were glassing. We could see this ladder stand, and we were like, not a chance we're going to get permission. Just didn't have that feel, like, you're not going to get permission to go in there without blood. And
right.
And so we kind of, well, I mean, we would have went and knocked on that door, but I mean, this is all the way back. This is like pushing 3 miles to the start of it from where we had last seen the deer or something like that.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot of doubt in there just in that alone. And then you got all these posted signs and everything. So you're kind of like, maybe he could have doubled back. I mean, he would have had to double all the way back and beyond where we had shot him to get there, so to speak. And, so there's a lot of doubt there too, but it was in the back of our heads. And, but anyway, so I had spotted this buck. Chancey's like, you got to go after him. You've searched all this, and it just wasn't meant to be or whatever. And
right.
And finally, I was like, I didn't want to, but I was like, you know what? All right, let's go do it, And I was pretty confident that we were going to be able to sneak up on this buck and get him.
Yep.
And I ended up getting like 7 steps from this deer, and I there was one tree there, and in order to tell how his body was lying, I had to get tight on this tree because he was in this ditch and there was some shadows there, and I couldn't tell if the shadows were like shadows of the dirt or his hide or what, and I wanted to make sure before I sent the arrow.
Right.
And but I'm tight on this tree, so now I have to back up a little bit to give myself a little space. Otherwise, my bow is going to hit the tree, obviously.
Right.
And as I'm setting my heel back, I'm setting my last step, and one little piece of stem grass, snapped, and he heard that, and this buck jumps up, and he turns broadside perfect at about 8 yards, and like looks at me like, what in the world are you doing? And I'm like, and I was like, there's no way I can screw this up, and I drew back and I shot, and it had to happen quick the way it unfolded, and thank God I shot right over him.
Yeah.
I don't know how I did that, but I think it was just fate. I think that's just the way it was meant to go. It was a very humbling experience. There's a lot of things that were out of our control. I mean, when you think about everything, all these landowners that had to let us go and everything, I mean, there are so many things that were out of our control.
Right.
So I didn't end up getting that deer, and at this point, I mean, we're not giving up on the big one, but we're pretty darn close. I mean, we're still like thinking about, like, is there anything that we missed? We get back to the vehicle, we stop into the second landowner's place and talk to him and like, what do you think about this spot or that spot? I mean, we're not 100% giving up, but we're about there. And
yeah.
And in fact, I think at the end of that day, we ran into the first landowner that had seen him run out in front of his truck, and
yep.
Him and some of his buddies had been out pheasant hunting too, and they had been, basically covering a lot of this ground too, and they hadn't seen him. And, he, told me, he's like, well, if I find his sheds this spring or if I see him, I'll let you know. And, it basically had that feel like it's over.
It's over.
I mean,
right. You're getting that sense.
We got one more day that that was gonna be our last day, but we thought, well, let's stay one more day. And so anyways, the next day comes, and so this is day 4 now, of looking for him.
Yeah.
And we go into the gas station to grab a little food. We run into this fella that had seen this 8-pointer that Chancey had shot. It had been on the back of Shay's vehicle for right after he had shot him. We loaded him on there and took him to the hotel or whatever, and he had seen it.
Yeah.
And he mentioned it, and he said, yeah. He goes, I got some pictures of that deer or whatever, I can send them over to you. Some, I don't know, I think trail cam pictures or something. Well, I thought, well, I'm going to ask him about this big deer. And so I showed him a picture. I had him on my phone now from the video footage. And I said, you know, have you seen this one? I hit this one, and I told him about it, and he said that he had seen him a few times in the summer, and you know, I said, you know, it's kind of one of those hunting things. You don't have to tell me, but we've been trying to figure out where this deer may be called home, and he didn't say anything, and so I said, you know, we're thinking this creek bottom over here, and it's the one that I had mentioned. Chancey and I kind of had in the back of our heads. It was posted and stuff, but you know, that was kind of like the last spot that it's the last spot that we thought maybe he made it that far. I mean, that's a haul. I mean, by that point, that deer has had to have gone like 7 miles on that broken leg to get to there with the first day's activities and everything, or something like that. Right. Or six, depending on where he's at. I think about 6 miles to get to it. Anyway, so he mentioned to us, he said, right away then, he said, no, he lived right out there where you shot him, like 30 yards from where you shot him. And, you know, I mean, something just didn't feel right. Yeah. He was a really nice guy, and he was, you know, probably just didn't want to give away where the deers had lived or whatever. I don't blame him. But something didn't seem right there. And so, but you take it with a grain of salt. You know, it's like, well, maybe he hunts that creek bottom. Maybe he's got permission to hunt that creek bottom. Maybe he just, you know, doesn't want us monkeying around in there. You don't know, but anyways, so we head out into the area, and well, we spotted this buck that from day 5 and 6 that went south, and he was out there with a doe on this piece of public, and here again, Chancey's like, you know, and I'm thinking the same thing at this point, like, okay, we got to go after this deer. This is the one we're meant to get. We have some history with this deer. You know, maybe this whole thing with this deer that I hit is just a humbling experience. Whatever it might be, I don't know, but it doesn't look like it's meant to be. And so let's go after this deer. So we make an attempt to go after this deer, and we get to about 100 yards from him. Well, this was a piece of walk-in, and there was like 3-4 horses out there. Well, these horses came over and spooked him and his doe out of there. And, you know, I'm like, geez, can a guy catch a break? You know, I'm like, you know, I hit this big one, and then, you know, you search all this ground, and then, you know, this deal with this deer yesterday that I snuck up on and shot the arrow right over his back. And it's like, you know, you start to like question everything you're doing. Like, how can I be messing up this bad? And how can everything be going, you know, south like this? And you know, you're down in the dumps, but at the same time, you're trying to find ways to make a joke out of it a little bit. And and we get back to the vehicle, and we, you know, I made a comment to Chancey. I said, well, you know, I thought, you know, it was meant to be, you know, and I guess not, you know, and we headed up the road, you know, and I took a drive by that creek bottom again. Yeah. And, you know, looked at it and drove past it here again, seen all the private signs. It doesn't look good. But in the meantime, this fellow from the gas station had sent me a picture of the deer from the summer when it was in velvet. Okay. And right away, I noticed that there was a couple of small trees in the picture, and they weren't real big. And there was also Milo in there. Well, none of that stuff was within a half mile where I shot the deer. So I knew right away that I didn't know where, but I knew right away that you know, that deer probably didn't live out there. And if he did live 30 yards from where I shot him, that fellow probably would have went after him, you know. Because even if he was, you know, we were 20 yards from the fence line. And so even if the deer lived 10 yards on the other side of the line, he probably would have wandered onto the public, you know. You know, I mean, it just would have happened. So
you're doing a little detective work at this point. You're studying the photo.
At this point, you know, and I'm not trying to be dirty about it or anything like that. Like I said, I mean, he seemed like a really nice guy and everything, but, you know, just a couple things just weren't quite adding up. And so, you know, we drove by that creek bottom, and we drove past it about 2 miles, and we were headed to a spot where we had seen another big buck, like on day 3. And we were kind of headed that direction. And before we got there, I just stopped the car, and I said to Chancey, I said, you know what? I'm just going to go track down who owns it. I'm going to explain the whole thing to them. And if they don't let me go, they don't let me go. I mean, it's a long ways from where we last seen the deer, but that's going to be the one spot. That's always going to be the one spot that I'm going to wonder, about.
Right.
And so I looked it up, who owned it, and went to their house and knocked on the door. And right away, I see this big buck in this guy's garage when he opens the door, and I'm thinking, oh, dear Lord, this is... this guy probably knows about the deer. He probably is not going to, be too happy that I hit him. And you know how it is in this day and age. It's just kind of the way it is.
Right.
And, so I explained the whole thing to him, and he ended up being just extremely nice as you could ever dream of. I mean, he told me he hadn't seen the deer, didn't know about it. And he told me, he said, if you hit him, you should try and find him. And he actually mentioned, he said, if you searched all that ground, I told him where I had searched and everything. And he said, if you searched all that, he said, he's probably down in that creek bottom. And actually, I had only asked to search this 160 acres of this creek bottom that was closest and appeared to have the most cover.
Yeah.
To closest to where we had last seen the deer. And he actually mentioned, he said, as long as you're going through it, you should probably check that 160 to the north. And so I did, and thank God he said that, because although there wasn't as much cover in there, I made it about 150 yards off the road, and he jumped out 5 yards from me.
No way.
And in fact, there was just a couple of small cedar trees there. Most of the trees followed this fence line through there, and I was walking that fence line, and I was almost past those trees, and I thought, you know what, I better go walk over there and just check, just to be sure, just so I don't have any doubts. And I get over there, and he jumped out 5 yards away.
Wow.
And when it happened, I'm like, is this happening? Am I in a dream? Like, there you are.
Right.
I've been looking for you for, this is the fourth day now of looking. And he actually, he stumbled out, ran out, and as he's running out, now he's out of the, he's in wide open, but I'm running after him at this point while he's running away, thinking maybe he'll stop and maybe I can get a shot. Well, he stops. He's about 45, 50 yards out. He stops to turn back and look. I hit the deck, grabbed an arrow, and I still had sunflower seeds in my mouth from when I got out of the van. And I'm like trying to spit all these seeds out of my mouth, like so I can get a good anchor and everything, and grabbing an arrow, and I get an arrow on, and I draw back and I shoot, and I just barely sailed it over him. Yeah. And then I'm like, oh man. And I mean, that's a poke with a longbow, 45, 50 yards, but I do practice out that far, and at this point, of course, I'm shooting. And so I grab another arrow, and I draw back, and at this point, I'm like, he's going to flee any second, Yeah. Like I was like, he's going to be probably running before the arrow even gets there. And I shoot, and the arrow goes right behind him. And I'm like, I mean, just barely. Both those arrows were like probably 2-3 inches away.
Gotcha.
And I'm like, holy crap. And he's still standing there. So I grab a third arrow. And at this point, my muscles are like completely just limp. And not from just shooting 2 arrows, just from I don't know if you've ever had that happen. That's the most intense moment I've ever had in my life.
You mean the adrenaline,
rattled
Jared?
moment.
The whitetail
adrenaline
we're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't rattled at all for the first shot or the first 2 shots on that deer or whatever. I had all day to think about it. But now, now I'm completely I've lost my mind. I mean, as I'm drawing this third arrow, it's like my muscles just give way, and I'm just like, and I didn't get it to even full draw, I don't think, hardly, and I let it go, and I'm not even going to say that arrow was so far off. So now he takes off. He's running, and I watched him go about 400 or 500 yards, and he goes into these little patch of cedars in this creek bottom. So I give him about 15, 20 minutes. I don't want to give him too much time. It's probably about 10, 11 in the morning, something like that. Yeah. I don't want to give him too much time, but I want to give him a little bit of time to maybe bed down, maybe, let his guard down a little bit so I can maybe try to go up there and spot him without him picking me off first. Right. Which isn't super likely, but I give him about 15 minutes and proceed up there, and I find his track right where he's going into these cedars, and I lose his track shortly thereafter, but I kind of got a general idea where he's going. And
Yep.
and I get in there, and he busts out. There's no chance. He knew what was up, and he was tucked into a spot and watching for me. And so now he takes off running, and now he knows the game's on. And, I'm tailing him as best I can to just keep a visual on him at this point. And he gets to a point where I know Chancey's got him spotted now, too. Chancey was sitting on a high spot in the vehicle again.
Yep.
And so at that point, I know that there's no way for me to chase after this deer, and so I run out to the vehicle thinking maybe if I get to the vehicle, maybe I can get ahead of where he's going somewhat and cut him off. If I can see him coming from a few hundred yards away and kind of tell where he's going, maybe I can, make a move and cut him off without him knowing and get in the spot. And
right.
So I get out to the vehicle. Well, by this point, Chancey's seen him, but now he's lost visual on the deer too, because he got into a little low dip in this creek. And Chancey thought that he kept following it and blew through the section. And so he took me around, dropped me off on the section road, and I walked the road trying to find his track in the dirt, and I couldn't find his track in the dirt. And so I was like, well, I better double back into the section and see if he's held up in there somewhere. Even if I just jump him to get him going, just so we can keep this rolling, because we don't want to run out of light here now that we got a beat on him.
Right.
And so I double back probably 400 or 500 yards into the section, and I don't see him anywheres, and there's a little bit of cover down in there. So once I didn't see him, then I got down into the cover and started coming through the cover, because I know that, okay, I'm not probably going to get a shot while he's in this cover, but at least I can get him out of there and maybe set myself up for an opportunity somewhere else in another situation.
Right.
And I got into some tall weeds, probably 6 feet tall weeds, a little patch of them, not more than, probably not even a half acre. And he jumped out like 5 yards, 10 yards from me. On a sprint, no chance for a shot.
Okay.
And so I see him go for about 300 yards, and he disappears. And at that point, then I run as fast as I can to get there. And I peek up over the top of this rise, and I'm like looking for him. I can't see him anywhere. And so then I walked up over the rise, and as I'm walking over the rise, well, now I see him, and he's about 300 yards out, standing under this cedar tree. And now he's into the next section. And so he's watching me. So I just kind of like keep walking, and I kind of loop and try and make him think that I didn't see him, and I kind of dip back where I came from.
Yeah.
And as I dip back, I kind of slowly peek my head up to see, did he flee then, or is he still standing there? Well, he took off. As soon as I disappeared, then he's like, I'm out of here. And so he's running across the next section. And Chancey sees him from the vehicle, and he gets all the way. So he goes for a half mile on that sprint, and he gets into the 160 acres where he originally jumped out of this little tiny woodlot in front of that guy's truck.
Yeah.
And Chancey picks me up in the van and takes me around to the other side. And when I had searched that piece of that 160 acres, I had jumped several deer in there.
Okay.
And I kind of knew how they filtered through it, or how they had that time. And so I got set up in a spot where they were kind of, most likely to come through. And then the arrangement was if he hadn't come through in a half hour, then Chancey was going to go in, on the back edge of it and see if he could spot the deer anywhere in there.
Yeah.
And if he did spot him, then he was going to come out and get me. And if he bumped him, well, then I was kind of set up. And
gotcha.
And it was kind of a risky move, because now we don't have a guy on a high point to keep a visual if this doesn't go right. This deer could, blow by me or squirt out one side. I can't see the whole 160 acres. If he squirts out, we're losing our visual and have no idea where he went.
Right.
And so it is kind of a risky move, but we felt like this was the best opportunity so far on him for a follow-up. So that's what we did. He never came through. Chancey ended up walking in there, and shortly thereafter, I noticed a couple of deer come running through. I think what happened is he bumped a couple of deer.
Yeah.
That bumped him, and because Chancey never saw the deer. But right behind those deer, a couple of minutes, there comes the big one.
Okay.
And all these deer had crossed. Because this farmer had cattle, and that's why he was in that woodlot that day when that buck ran out, is he pulled in there to check on his cattle.
Right.
And this buck ran out in front of his truck. Well, where these deer necked down, there was this cattle fence, and it was a good one. It wasn't one of those ones that is falling apart. And, I thought, how all the deer had crossed it when I came through. They had all crossed the fence and filtered into the next part of it. Well, I thought because this deer had a broken leg, I thought, well, maybe he'll just follow the fence line around to get to the next section, which isn't that far away. We're only about 200 yards from it, and there's a lot of cover over there. So I thought he'd just follow it around.
Yeah.
And he gets about 80 yards out, and now I can't see him because there's some trees right there. And I'm like panicking now. I'm like, I got this little camera set up on this post, and it's all set up for him to come on this side of the fence line. And I'm like, shoot, is he going to cross? I don't know. I can't see him. If he crosses right now, it's going to be too late for me to cross. If I don't. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to cross the fence and hope that that's what he's doing. And I crossed the fence. Well, when I did, the fence made a little bit of noise because it was one of those good ones that you can't go under, and you got to make a little bit, or sometimes you make a little noise going over. And he, at that point, I saw him. He snapped his head. I could see him in the brush. And I was like, okay, he definitely crossed, which was good at this point, but bad for the camera view angle. But anyways, he freezes for probably 30 seconds. And, I'm thinking, okay, can I get to the camera and turn the camera? I got some tall weeds between me and the camera, and I'm like, there's no way. With that noise of the fence, he hears that noise in the weeds, he's gonna panic. He's gonna know something's up for sure.
Wow.
And so I decided, I'm like, you know what? We've got all this other footage. I'm just gonna scrap trying to turn the camera because it's probably gonna get the whole thing busted doing it. So I kind of like crawl my way out. There's some matted down weeds, and I kind of crawl my way out as I can see him moving, and he's on course, kind of like these other deer were. And I get out close to this field road that kind of cuts through there, and he's running right down to it. He's probably about 60, 70 yards out, and he's running right down this field road, and I'm like, man, if he keeps following this, he's going to be 5 yards away. This is going to be perfect. And I'm flat to the ground pretty much, and in that cat-like position that I kind of was telling you about, and I'm waiting. Well, he gets about 50-yard mark, and he starts cutting into the woods, which is what the other deer had actually done. They didn't follow that field road the whole way. And I was like, oh, no. Because now I know, like, I can see I've got one lane, and it's about 4 feet wide, and it's about 35, 40 yards out. And I don't know if he's going to stop. Most likely not. And I got to get turned in here, too. And so he's about 3 deer lengths from that lane. And I got to get turned now. And as I'm turning, some of those weeds, those matted down weeds, because it was dead quiet that day, no wind, nothing, but some of those weeds made a little bit of noise, and he heard that again, which I was actually surprised about, but he stops. And thank God there was a tree right there, so he couldn't see me at that point. Yeah. But I also had no shot. And I pretty much knew that his next move was going to be on a trot. And so the instant he started to take off, and I just drew and shot as quick as I could because I knew I was going to have my hands full trying to get the arrow there because the lane was only like 3 deer lengths ahead of him. So I just drew and shot as fast as I could as he took off. And I remember the arrow was sailing, and I was like, oh, too late. I could see his vitals were just passing through the lane, and there's a big, big tree there, and his vitals were just getting behind that tree, and I was like, arrow is too late. Dang it, and I'm thinking about my next move. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to jump over this fence and run out 200 yards and make a loop, and hopefully he stops and what cover's left there before blowing through into the next section, and at least maybe I can get to a high spot, and all this is running through my head in that instance where the arrow's flying through the arrow, and at the last second, the arrow connects and hits him right in the front of the hindquarters, and which isn't an ideal shot, but at that point I knew right away that it was over. And he went down in like 50 yards. I hit that artery or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, it's a long story, but there's so many twists and turns and little things, and I I mean, I'm pretty blessed that it all unfolded that way. I mean, I think we counted it up. There was like 8 different variables or something like that that were completely out of our control that had to go right in order for us to get that deer. And when we walked up to him, I mean, we knew he was big, but we never thought he was as big as what he was. And so that made it that much cooler on top of it, I guess, just some icing on a cake. But no, it was an unbelievable story. I mean, it's even regardless of the size of the deer, I mean, the story behind it and everything was, and when you see it on video, I think you'll agree it was just kind of neat to be able to show that to people. So you definitely sense those frustrating moments of looking for that deer and not wanting to give up, but knowing that you probably should cut your losses at some point so you don't go completely nuts in the head.
Right. Right.
But,
and then the arrow that finally did him in was, in fact, the only arrow that you shot that you thought was not even close. Yet it's the one.
Well,
I
didn't. Yeah, I didn't think in flight. I didn't think it was going to get there fast enough.
Right.
Like I thought he was moving too fast, and his vitals were just starting to go behind that tree, and it looked like the arrow was going to completely miss him.
Looks like another,
and just by a little bit, and it just
right.
All of a sudden it connected, and I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" Because it's a long shot, and the deer's trotting on a move because he knows something's up.
Yeah.
And I didn't have. It was one of those situations. We kind of talked about it early on. You asked about why the longbow or whatever, and in that situation right there is no way I would have been able to pull that off at the compound.
Right.
Because as fast as I couldn't even draw and really like anchor and hold. I mean, as soon as he took off, I just drew and shot. Like,
right. It was the speed of the getting the arrow off the bow that made that count. It wasn't the speed of the arrow. Exactly. It was the speed at which you could actually deliver it.
Right. Correct.
That was an intense story, Jared. I thought you had that buck killed like 7 times.
Right.
Yeah, it's a long story, and I apologize. I had to drag you all the way through it. But
I wouldn't say you dragged it. It's sometimes you get those Academy Award winning movies that go on forever, but you'd never realize it was like a 2-hour show. And you just watch the whole thing, and it's just this endless story that captivates you. That's what you just did for us.
It was like a beautiful thing, You just play all this out, and you're very detail-oriented about it. Man, I was right there beside you.
The storyline, every little piece of this story was detailed, and it's wow.
Well, and I mean, there was all those details, like we talked about. The if that deer wouldn't have ran out in front of that first landowner's truck, I don't know. I mean, that guy was a nice guy. I don't know if he would have let us go search his land, but I'm pretty convinced the other guy wouldn't have without that landowner's visual on him. And those things were out of our control. The fellow we ran into at the gas station, I don't know. We had that creek bottom in the back of our head, and we felt really strong about it, but without running into him, I don't know. That might have been what pushed me over the top. I mean, I was already, about there, but that might have been what pushed me over the top to say, you know what, I'm going to go knock on this guy's door, and then that guy had to let us go too,
Right.
And so there was and I had to, if I would have got that deer on day 3 of looking for him that I shot the arrow over, I had to miss that deer in there, and then those horses spooked that other one out. I mean, there were so many different variables that it's like completely out of our control that had to happen in order for that to all unfold that way.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely blow my mind. That's crazy.
Well, Jared, man, great story, but I got 10 rapid-fire questions that...
Okay. I'll try and make them quick.
I did not prep you for these before the show started, so just so you know, they're just rapid, random, hammer them.
Just to get to know you a little bit better. Go ahead.
Okay.
What's your number one hunting tip?
My number one hunting tip? I would say overall what's brought us the most success hunting public land is hunting on the ground. Just because of what we were talking about earlier, you can adapt so quick to what the deer are doing. If you run into other hunters, it's not that big a deal. It's not like you lug 20 pounds of tree stands and foot pegs and whatever in there and you're all set up. You can adjust to that. It's not that big a deal. So I would say hunting on the ground, just, you know what I mean? You spot a big one, you can move in on them, you can, you know, take a different angle. I would say overall that's definitely the number one tip. I mean, even back when I hunted private ground, I'd pick my times to be aggressive a lot better. But even back when I hunted private ground, I definitely got better overall results hunting on the ground. So, yeah. I'm not going to say that's, you know, there's a lot of people, a lot of my friends and stuff hunt out of blinds or tree stands or whatever. I mean, it's whatever makes you tick, you know? Whatever gets you jacked up to go out there and have a good time and enjoy hunting. I mean, that's the ultimate thing, you know? I mean, I'm not expecting to shoot a deer that big this year or in the future. I'm just looking to go out there and have a good time again this year. So.
Right. So utilize the ground hunting.
Yep. Utilize the ground hunting. That would be my number one tip.
Gotcha. What's the one thing that you can't hunt without? You got anything that's like a good luck charm or anything of that nature?
I would say outside of the bow and the arrow, I would say my optics, binoculars, probably being the first thing. I use a spotting scope a lot, but if I'm without my binoculars, I'm you know, every now and again I'll forget them and I'm going right back to the vehicle, whether it's wooded terrain or not. When you're hunting on the ground like that, you're working a lot off of visuals and spotting those deer before they spot you. And if I don't have my binoculars, it's not good. And so, I mean, you can pretty much everything else. I would rather be out there in blue jeans and a white T-shirt than camo without my binocs. If I got my binocs, that's definitely my one
important.
tool. Yeah, for sure.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve. Oh God, you stumped me there.
That's not
when the bucks are playing baby games. I don't know. I don't really get, you know, like I mean, hunting public land, some people get annoyed when they run into other hunters or whatever. I'm usually pretty good at avoiding that, so it doesn't happen that often, and it is public land, so that never bothers me when I run into other people. So that definitely isn't one. I mean, yeah, I guess in general, yeah, my pet peeve is when the bucks are winning a lot, you know, and and they're just kicking our butt, and we just can't. I mean, it goes in streaks too. I mean, a couple of years ago, I mean, Shay, we're having this. We were like, man, we're on a roll right now. I mean, like if we spot a big buck and he's on public land, there's like a 60-70% chance we're going to get him. You know, we're going to figure out a way to slip in on him and get him. Well, that went out the window real quick. It was just a little short streak, you know, and you know, you go into your streaks where you can have, you know, 2 seasons ago, I think we had 18 big bucks within bow range, and we only got a shot on one of them. They just kept, you know, dip diving and, you know, getting in the right situations where we couldn't get shots, and that was really frustrating. So yeah, I guess that'd be my pet peeve. But at the same point, if we were slam dunking them every time, I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much, and I know that. So that's another thing that I love about hunting on the ground is it's very challenging in those engaging situations, and oftentimes they don't go the way you want them to, and it's very addicting. So
right, makes sense. How old are you today, Jared?
I'm 31.
What would the 31-year-old Jared tell the 20-year-old Jared?
Don't go producing hunting videos thinking you're just going to hunt for a living. No, I don't know. I've been asked a few times, you know, some different things, kind of like in that kind of generalization, I guess you could say, about, you know, making hunting videos or whatnot. And I guess here's what I'll say. I'm glad I've done it. I've been very blessed, and I'm very thankful for all the support over the years. But when I stop and think about it, if I knew everything that went into it, that would have to, you know, that all the work that would have to go into it and everything, I probably never would have done it, and I probably wouldn't start from scratch all over again. But I'm glad I've done it, and it's been a really, really neat experience. I mean, just I'll give you an example. To get this video edited and out the door and to have them for this show a few weeks ago, I worked 61 hours straight without sleep. I shouldn't say that. I had actually 50 hours into it. I called my sister over and I said, "Can you come over here and just sit here, and make sure that I don't fall asleep at the computer desk, because if I do, we're not going to have this video." And there was at one point where the computer had to do something, and that was going to take about 5-10 minutes. And I said, "As soon as it's done doing that, wake me up. I'm sleeping on this couch right here."
Wow.
So I mean, and I mean, working 30 hours straight is not uncommon. I mean, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many times I've worked 30 plus hours straight. A 20 hour day straight is, I do a ton of those in a year. So there's a lot of work. It's not a 40, 50 hour a week job. I remember years ago, before the videos and stuff, I had ran into Pat Reeve a little bit and had asked him a few questions. And I asked him, I remember one question I asked Pat, and I said, "So when's your downtime?" Or whatever, and he kind of chuckled at me, almost annoyed that I asked him, and he said, "There is no downtime," or something along those lines. Is there isn't any downtime. Get real, like there's a lot more to it than what you think getting into it. And looking back on it, that was really good advice, because I knew right then, like, in order to make it a go, you're gonna have to give it everything you got.
Right.
So.
Right, for sure. You meet a stranger in a lobby of a hotel or on an elevator, wherever. They ask, "What do you do for a living?" What do you say, Jared?
I usually just allude to something like, "Oh, I do graphic design," or "I do a little bit of video production," or something like that. I never tell them actually what I do. No. So.
I guess I understand in a sense. What did you eat for breakfast?
I didn't eat breakfast. Seriously, I mean, I haven't ate breakfast in a long time. I mean, here again, you get so busy with so much on your plate, you forget to eat. I mean, 24 hours without eating, that happens pretty common this time of year.
Wow.
Where it's like, oh man, I haven't ate since last night, and it's tonight. So yeah, I'm not super nutritional, I guess you could say.
Gotcha.
I'm not real up on that.
Let's say you get your own billboard, a blank canvas. What would it say?
A blank canvas billboard?
Yes.
Yep.
Jeez, you're gonna stump me again. Gosh, I don't know. Just like hunting, something hunting related, or just
blank
in
canvas.
general, or
Whatever you want to put on. Anything that you can possibly think of, you can put on it.
I don't know. Probably I'd have to think about it a bit, but off the top of my head, I don't know. Find what makes you tick.
Nice.
Find what makes you tick in life.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I say the word successful to you. Who is the first person that pops in your mind, and why?
I think I'd have to reference probably Fred Bear, even if that sounds maybe a little bit like overused or cliche. I've read a decent amount on Fred Bear, and one thing I liked about Fred Bear is he did a lot, and sometimes I feel guilty of not doing enough to actually like promote the archery. And from what I've read, he didn't, at least in the early years, I don't know if he did throughout the entire time, but he didn't stop other companies from using technology he invented, because he wanted to grow the sport of archery. So, I don't know if he patented stuff, but from what I read, if he did patent it, I can't remember. It's been a little while since I read that little section, but he didn't stop. Like, I think it was like Pearson came out with a similar broadhead or something like that, and he never did anything about it, because I guess ultimately he wanted to grow the sport of archery. That was his main concern, which back in those days, archery wasn't big and strong like it is today.
Right.
So, and he seemed like in the readings, it sounds like he was a really humble, kind of guy. So I'd say, when I think about things, like that shot on that deer, he was trotting, and some people might think that that's unethical or whatever. But, I stop and I think, about what I've read of Fred Bear, and I don't think that there's, not given Fred Bear was probably a better shot, but in his writings, him and his companions, missed game and took, similar type shots on game from what I've gathered, and I think they all would have taken that shot. But yet in Fred Bear's field notes, you can really sense his appreciation for nature and the wilderness and everything about it, and the animals, and you sense that he has a really deep care for them and everything. And yet I have no doubt that he would have taken a shot like that. And so I guess you could say that Fred Bear is probably the one that I would reference, or question. If I do something, I would question, would Bear have done this? So
Gotcha.
That's very cool. What's a day in the life of Jared look like?
Pretty bleak. You should have asked. No, I mean, it's a full day. I mean, I think I kind of was telling Jay earlier, it's like you just give you a typical day like today. It's like I'm researching what codecs and formats we're going to record to this year, and still kind of like digging around with what editing software we want to use for this year. We weren't really happy with what we used this year, so researching all that, making sure that's going to all work good, and flipping over and okay, we're getting all this camera gear ready. We get some new stuff, and running down to a machine shop to see if they can quick machine out a few parts to make things work a little bit better for mounting on these cameras. And I'm thinking about like, okay, I got to build this heavy duty reese hitch for this elk hunt we're doing that we can throw 2 chest freezers on, and figuring out the dimensions and all that. And if I had a welder and a cutter here, I'd be doing that too. But my dad's shop's an hour and a half away, and I don't have a lot of time, so I'm probably going to have this machine shop do it. But, so one day I might be welding, one day I might be editing, and one day I might be, putting together, designing T-shirts, pretty boring, pretty bleak if you're a girl, right? This guy works all the time. Hopefully the business has been getting stronger, and it's been a struggle to bring other help in for several, over the years since the start, but it's been getting a little bit better. So hopefully I've this Ben Colbeck, he helped me out a bunch on this edit of this new project or this last project, and he's going to help edit going into this fall. My sister, over the last couple of years, she's helped out quite a bit when she can, and she's going to start helping quite a bit more now. So hopefully some of that stuff will free up some of my time, so I could actually, maybe in the summer months, maybe I could actually go fishing or something, or have it or go out with the guys and not feel guilty like I got all this stuff on my plate I need to get done, because there's a lot of stuff that is kind of fallen by the wayside that really needs to get taken care of. I mean, we got like 50 new T-shirts and stuff like that since January that aren't on the website yet, and just because I haven't had the time to do it. And I'd like to get a blog page up on our website and kind of start to, maybe put out a couple minute long videos of, maybe kind of like how to. It could be entertaining stuff. It could be how to, giving people little tips here and there, doing what I can to, answer some of these questions that, I used to be able to get back to everybody's emails and everybody's, Facebook messages, but with trying to keep everything else moving forward with the business, I haven't been able to do that like I used to be able to, and I feel really bad about it, but that's just kind of where it's at right now. And but hopefully in the future we can get a better handle on that. So
perfect. What's a deer hunting day in the life of Jared look like?
A deer hunting day?
Yep.
Well, it's funny you should ask that. I used to be really, really good about being, out to the woods before the sun came up. And especially when I'm hunting with Shay, that never seems to happen. And I wish he was here to defend himself a little bit, but he's in Canada fishing, having a great time while I'm working. No, anyway, he is in Canada having a good time, but he needs that. But no, over the last few years, a lot of times we hit the woods about the time when we can actually see what's going on out there. I used to try and get in, before the sun comes up, and I still do in certain situations, but oftentimes I kind of like to go in just when I can start to see everything then I can have a little bit better, I guess, I'm not as likely to be spooking game as I'm walking in and whatnot.
Right.
But once that happens, I mean, I'll just give you a quick run through. I mean, we go into a piece, whether it's a new piece or a spot that was hot last year or a spot that was hot yesterday, we hit that piece and we go into it, and every piece is different. Some pieces, depending on the vegetation and everything, we might be moving at a real slow pace. Other pieces we might be walking through. If it's a new piece and things haven't been cranking very well for us lately, there's a pretty good chance we're going to be walking through that piece, just trying to find out if this is worth it. We don't want to spend a ton of time. Even if we jump a few deer, I'm not too concerned about it. Public land deer get jumped and bumped and stuff like that a lot of times, all the time. They're used to it. Usually they don't go too terribly far. In fact, we started this approach a few years ago where during the peak rut, when they're locked down, we literally walk through the woods until we bump a big one on a doe, and then give them about a half hour, 45 minutes to calm down, and usually they don't go too far, and then we try to slip in on them. But we'll hit it hard into a piece, cover that ground. If it's cold, we're bumping out and going to the next piece, and the next piece might be just up the road a little bit, or it could be halfway across the state. I mean, and once let's say we're in a state, and okay, tonight we've hunted all day. It hasn't been productive here. We got this Iowa tag in our pocket. We drive through the night to Iowa, or it might be Kansas or wherever. Most of the time we drive through the night because we don't want to burn up a day of hunting just to be driving. So pretty much always when we're making a long distance trek, 8-10 hours, we're going to be driving through the night. So we hunted all one day, drove through the night, then we hunt all that day, and then we finally get sleep the next night. That's pretty typical. So that gives you a little bit of a run through, a short version, I guess.
Definitely.
That's an intense day.
Intense day, Jared.
Yeah.
Jared, tell us quickly, or as long as you want to take, how do we, or how do the listeners get your stuff? Like, how do we get your DVDs? How do we get your T-shirts? All that kind of stuff.
Well, there's three ways. We've got on our website, we've got a dealer's page. People can check that and see if there's a dealer in their area. And some of that stuff, like the videos, some of the caps and stuff, they're available through the dealers. But the shirts and stuff, we just don't have the margin for. So those are like an online or at the shows kind of deal. Otherwise, if you don't have a dealer in your area, or they don't have a dealer in their area, they can jump on our website and get it there. My sister handles all the shipping. Usually, we got backed up a little bit with these new releases, but usually she's shipping everything out on a daily basis. So stuff goes out the door typically really quick. Otherwise, we go to about 8 shows a year, and I don't think we have our show schedule up for next year yet, but we should here in the next month have that up, and people can check and see if there's a show that is in their area, an expo, and if we're there, they can pick the merchandise up there as well.
Awesome. Very cool. Very, very cool. Jared, it's been just a pleasure. I mean, I always have a good time listening to you tell a story. You're a great storyteller. You come with twists and turns on it doesn't matter if it was this deer or the last show. It's always interesting. And I really appreciate what you do and everything you do for the sport of archery and deer hunting. It's just, it's an honor knowing you, man.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys getting me on the horn here, and I know it was a long-winded episode, but thanks a lot for doing that.
Just an amazing story. Just mind-blowing. I can't believe that we could turn a deer story into like this epic tale that, mirrors, probably movies like Gladiator. Really. I mean, this is the Gladiator of the deer hunting podcast world, is really what it came down to.
Yeah, it really is.
It was a very long story, but you stayed in the whole way. And I went back and listened to last week, even though I edited it and recorded the whole thing.
Isn't that amazing that it grabs you like that?
It does. And I've talked to Jared over the last few days, and he's shared it. So we've been having fun all week. Oh yeah, just a great story. I'm glad he finally got that whitetail, and I cannot believe. But I think there are a lot of stories like this that we just don't hear really. You know, there are a lot of pursuits of large whitetails that you chase for a long time. Some of them longer than what Jared took. I mean, he was out on a hunt, and it took him several days to get the deer he was looking for. But I mean, we've hunted some deer for 3 years, 4 years. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you know, just to go and put that much effort into finding a whitetail like that, and then finally putting your hands on him, that's just the icing on the cake. You know, that makes it all worth it. You never give up on a good whitetail that you've, you know, not necessarily shanked a shot, but a shot that you didn't think was perfect. You know, there's always that chance.
Right.
And that's the proof's in the pudding. He pursued it and found that buck.
Yeah, it's really cool that he pursued it, and it just in the longbow and on the ground, and you know, not in a tree stand, not with a gun, not even with a compound bow. I mean, this was like pure traditional. And to think, I mean, the name of his company is Whitetail Adrenaline. Can you imagine the adrenaline that's going through your body when you go through this entire 4 or 5 day hunt trying to find this thing, and when you actually catch up with it, like to the point where you actually have a second shot.
Yeah, and I was able to pick up a little bit of the video online.
Yep.
Just watching some of the highlights of that particular hunt, and it's just amazing how the footage is and how the story, you know, lays out, and it gets dark on them, and they pursue it the next day, and you know, he says he's never going to give up, and that's what it takes sometimes.
It was funny because I hadn't, as I think I had mentioned in the show, I had not actually read up on the show, or I had not read up on the story intentionally because I wanted to hear it fresh for the first time from Jared, so I could ask better questions. And by doing so, when I started to watch the film online, I was able to put it all together. So I know exactly what that is as he described.
Right, it's cool, really.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. Very cool.
For sure, really cool to go back and replay what the story was told to us versus the video footage. And man, it's word for word, and it matches right up.
It really does. It was really cool. So, Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
Yeah, and it's...
The Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
I'm going to touch base on this scent lock enforcer that we got in the mail, Jay. And it's quite amazing what this little unit has brought to the table. I've been doing some trial and error, and I can't say that I'll be hunting without it anymore. As far as my clothing and my boots, I wear my hunting boots to check some trail cameras, come back, and there's a little odor in them from where I was sweating. Ran the enforcer down in there for 5 minutes each side, took a smell of them, said, oh my goodness. It literally knocked the smell right out of my boots, Jay.
I've been experimenting myself with our little unit that we have, and I have to agree with you. I loaded it up in the small bathroom that we have, and within 5 minutes, the entire, I think it's 10 by 10 by 9-foot ceiling in there, and it was just you open the door, you could smell ozone.
It's amazing.
It's really just this little unit. It's just this little tiny unit. It's crazy.
I don't think that I'll be putting clothes on that hasn't been ran with this.
Right. I mean, if it can fill up a room that size in 5 minutes, then you can do it in any portable closet type thing or tote.
Your pickup truck,
you name it. But it really does eliminate the smell because, I've tested it on a few other odoriferous items, and it really does knock it down. It's crazy.
It is really crazy.
It smells like a nice fresh rainstorm.
You're exactly right.
Isn't that right?
That's exactly the smell. Once you smell the ozone, it's something that you've smelled in the woods before. Scent lock enforcer, I don't think I'm going to go without it come hunting season for a long time.
Thanks to Jared Scheffler for joining us on the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. And thank you to Tim Gauthier from Scent Lock Enforcer. And thank you to the Scent Lock Enforcer for becoming a sponsor on this show. Thank you to Jim Snow over at Euro Hanger for sponsoring the deer news this week. And thank you to Morse's Sporting Goods for sponsoring the Chubby Tines Tip of the Week. Dusty, it's been a great show, great finale, talking to Jared Scheffler. And I think it's time for us to go as well. Where can we find you when you're not hanging out here on the mic with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. Look me up on Facebook, facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. And if you're on Instagram, @ChasingAntler. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Best place is to first send me an email. I answer all my emails, so jay@bigbuckregistry.com. And if you'd like to check us out on all our social media platforms, we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Google, and you can listen to us on YouTube, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Blueberry. And the theme is the same. It's always Big Buck Registry. But if you want to just type in Big Buck Registry on Google, you will find all kinds of ways to listen to the show, including on our website. And we always post every morning that the new show comes out on Facebook and Twitter and all the other platforms. So you won't have a hard time finding us. Just type in Big Buck Registry into your browser, or if you're on iTunes, do it there. And if you're in iTunes, leave us a review. If you like the show, leave us a 5-star review and subscribe, and it'll notify you every Saturday when the new show is ready to be downloaded. This has been a great show, and thank you, my friend, for joining me on the show once again. And thank you to everybody out there listening to the show and tuning in to an hour of deer hunting talk, basically. We're going to do it again next week. Let's put it that way. I'm Jay Scott.
And I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.